All right, Reaction Monday. Question of the day. Should Lovie Smith be a one and done? You start talking about head coaches. You start talking about whether or not they should be one and done. And the internet goes nuts. The interaction goes nuts. It's a fun discussion to be had. But the question is, should the Texans after this season be looking for a new head coach? I'm going to lay out the case for, and I'm going to lay out the case against. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Follow me at Landry Locker on Twitter, at Landry Locker on Instagram, and we'll get into this, and we'll get everyone's opinions, etc. I want to start first by grading Lovie Smith's performance this year, because it is important to take into account the lack of talent on the roster. The front seven is an absolute disaster. The defensive personnel is a disaster, and really Lovie might not have a lot to work with. So you do got to keep that in mind, but you also got to keep in mind, we watch every single play. By we, I mean me and most of the people watch it. We watch every single play of the Texans. So the simple national perspective of, well, what did you expect to happen? Or, they're tanking and all that type of stuff. It really shouldn't factor in if you're following the team every play. It's like when Jadeveon Clowney was criticized and it was, well, he has less than 10 sacks. If you watched every single play and you watched him play, you realize the impact Clowney was having was measured by more than, sacks. So there is a gray area to keep in mind, but there are other things to take into play when you're talking about potentially having a one and done coach for the second straight year in the Caserio era. I'm going to first lay out the case for Lovie Smith being one and done, or one and peace out, as I put there. And I think there's a lot of cases for Lovie Smith being one and done, starting with performance. Despite the fact that personnel is limited, there have been some opportunities to win games, and the Texans have come up short. You hear Lovie Smith say all the time, we're close. And anyone who thinks that Lovie Smith is trying to lose games is not watching. The Texans are doing a good job losing games, and it's a good thing. And when I'm assessing Lovie Smith, I'm assessing Lovie Smith moving forward. I think he was the perfect guy for the job at this point. But moving forward, is Lovie Smith the right guy? That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. There aren't a lot of head coaches that could have success with this team. I understand that. But moving forward, is Lovie Smith going to be able to coach up these guys? I have reasonable doubts. Is he the right coach for Derek Stingley? A lot of zone. And this isn't even hindsight. This is one of the main talking points leading into the draft was, is Derek Stingley going to fit this system? If you've watched, Lovie Smith has coached this team the same way he coached the Chicago Bears. There's a lot of zone. Derek Stingley's out there, and performance-wise, the defense has been one of the worst defenses in the NFL the last couple of years. I mean, I know that we're grading on a curve, but worst defense in the league last couple of years. And they play not to lose. They don't play to win. So it almost seems, it's almost like if you're betting on the Texans, it's a safe bet when Lovie Smith is the coach, because a lot of times he's playing not to lose. Like yesterday, you watched the Giants game, I watched the Giants game, and Lovie Smith can tell himself, and he said it many times today during his media availability, that it was a close game and that they were Did you really feel like that was a one-possession ball game? Like, how many times have you watched the Texans lose like a one-possession ball game and you say, man, I never thought they had a chance? Sometimes when you coach, when you coach not to lose, you keep games close, and it's a little bit misleading. And that's kind of how it feels with Lovie Smith. There's a large body of work that we'll get more into when it comes to like Lovie Smith. But overall, performance-wise, the case number one for Lovie Smith being one and done is performance. The expectations were low, and many people, including myself, could argue that he has actually been worse than those expectations. I'll get to the comments at the end, so just keep those coming. I'd like to interact with all you. Case number two for being one and done, Lovie Smith. The quarterback. Not Davis Mills, but the next quarterback. If the Texans end up getting a quarterback with the number one pick, do you want Lovie Smith to be the guy to coach that quarterback? It's a fair question. Do you want Pep Hamilton to be? Again, personnel limitations. Pep Hamilton, though, fired 6, 7, whatever years ago, 8 years ago as an offensive coordinator. Hadn't been one till now. You watch the Texans offense. We know the limitations. You feel like he's coaching them up? If you bring a new quarterback, let's say you draft Bryce Young number one, do you want him coming into this situation? I thought Seth Payne, who, by the way, he's starting a channel too, so subscribe to Seth's channel. Seth tweeted out this, and as a former player, I think this is interesting. And I think this is really, really important for a quarterback, but I think it's also important for like the Stingleys and the Petries. Seth says, don't ignore in tanking what you would address in normal defeat. This is kind of a play on the Jeff Van Gundy. Don't ignore in victory what you wouldn't normally not ignore in defeat or whatever. Some of the issues with the Texans cannot simply be written off as a lost year. The young guys with promise are being polluted by bad football. You want that to happen for another 2 years? Something to keep in mind. So case one, performance. Case two, quarterback. Case three, finished product. And I think this is really when you take a step back, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There's like some I gotcha guys that are saying, well, what did you expect? I didn't expect much, but from year to year, especially when you're in a rebuild, you assess things in different ways. Like sometimes you want to have a veteran-heavy team like Caserio did when he didn't have draft picks. Then you bring in a lot of young guys, which is what they did this year. Lovie Smith, for this season, he made sense. Not many coaches wanted to take the job. You had the Josh McCown disaster, which would have been a PR nightmare, and you hadn't traded Deshaun Watson yet. So it wasn't very clear like what draft equity you were going to have if you were going to be able to trade Deshaun Watson at all, and there probably weren't a lot of coaches that you could choose from. So you were either going to swing for the fences with McCown or you went to the safe bet with Lovie Smith, which made sense now. Now that you know what draft equity you're going to have. You've already made some of those picks, including Dameon Pierce, by the way. Are you going to look at the head coaching position the same way next year? So it's kind of a fluid process. And furthermore, while there are some teams like in rebuilds, like the Jets, like the 49ers when they first brought in Kyle Shanahan, like, I don't know, name a head coach who had to find his way. You kind of know what Lovie Smith is as a head coach, don't you? Like, is Lovie Smith going to change the way that he's coached? In 15 seasons as a head coach, Lovie Smith has had 5 winning seasons. 5. He's nearly 30 games under 500 total as a head coach, and he has a losing record as an NFL coach. So is Lovie Smith going to like grow into something new? And furthermore, have you seen anything this year that makes you think he's not kind of stuck in his ways? That's another thing they're going to have to take into account. So performance, quarterback, is Lovie Smith the finished product? Case number 4, it's a more appealing gig now. I kind of just touched on that. Not very many people were going to take this job last year, and I can't really blame them. And Lovie Smith damn sure wasn't going to be a head coach anywhere else. If you give an incoming head coach, you give him some young talent, and there is some young talent on this roster. You give him more cap space than the Texans have had since probably 2018, I would say. You give them the number 1 pick, and who knows what Cleveland pick's going to be. There's a pretty decent amount of appeal to that job. So it's a more appealing gig now. So you have more coaches to choose from, more young guys to choose from. Which brings me to case number 5 for Lovie being one and done. And this one is the most appealing of all. San Francisco 49ers. And there's a lot of connections here. One of the connections is, if you're looking for another example of a team who had success that ended in turmoil, and then they kind of had to take a step back and rebuild, the San Francisco 49ers are a prime example, because they had 2 one-and-done coaches post Jim Harbaugh. You look at post Bill O'Brien, a little bit more of a disaster, less success than Harbaugh, but it ended in turmoil, and they had to figure some stuff out. San Francisco hired Jim Tom Sula. Then they hired Chip Kelly, and then they got their Kyle Shanahan. So there is an example of one-and-dones and then finding your guy. And San Francisco is that example. Also in San Francisco, if you look at the league right now and you look at the success, like coaches who have been hired after, rebuilds, or coaches have been hired to rebuild, Robert Saleh with the Jets, Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins. The Buffalo Bills are in 3rd place right now. You know where those guys came from? San Francisco. You know who they coached under? Kyle Shanahan. You know who else coaches under Kyle Shanahan? DeMeco Ryans. So San Francisco, you can connect to many ways. You can find a way to point to another organization who's had 2 one-and-dones. You can point to the coach that San Francisco hired in Kyle Shanahan. You can point to guys who've coached under Kyle Shanahan that are having success right now in rebuilds. And then you can point to a guy that also happens to be a former Texans player in DeMeco Ryans, who wouldn't mind the Texans hiring. Now, if they don't hire him, you just got to find somebody. It doesn't have to be Kyle Shanahan, but I'm connecting it to that. So the 5 cases for Lovie being one and done. Number 1, his performance, however you want to assess that. Number 2, do you want to bring a new quarterback into this situation? Are players being poisoned with bad football? Number 3, do you think the best is ahead for Lovie Smith? Do you think that Lovie Smith is a finished product, or do you think he can grow with this organization? And number 5, San Francisco. Cuss and discuss amongst yourselves, or put it in the comments at Landry Locker on Twitter, at Landry Locker on Instagram. Again, it's just however you see fit. And the crazy thing about where the Texans are, there's really no right answer. Really no right answer. There's a lot of chicken or egg arguments. There's a lot of tail chasing, but there's really no right answer. My main thing is, we never at any point said Lovie Smith's going to be a great coach. We said he was good for now. Is the for now going to be the same after this season? That's the question I think you have to ask yourself. The case against Lovie Smith being one and done, or one and peace out, the lack of talent. A lot of people say this, and you're right. The lack of talent. This team doesn't have a ton of talent. One of the most untalented teams in the NFL. But let me ask you this. Do you feel like a Kevin O'Connell, a Brian Dable, a Mike McDaniel, a Robert Saleh, do you feel like they'd have over one win right now? Maybe, maybe not. Lovie's not trying to lose games. Lovie's lost a lot more games than he's won throughout his career. And you can go to Illinois. You have like a half-decade example at Illinois, and you can say, well, that's college. College and pros are similar in a lot of ways. Brett Bielema is already winning in Illinois. But Lovie preached this same thing at Illinois. We're close. We're close. Be patient. Be patient. Tampa Bay. You saw what happened at Tampa Bay. The lack of talent. Okay, do you think Lovie's going to coach him up? Do you think Lovie's going to coach up Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, et cetera? Do you think the Giants would be 7-2 with Lovie Smith and Pep Hamilton as their coaches? Maybe the talent is an excuse, but the talent's going to increase next year. Does that automatically mean Lovie's going to be a better coach? Again, cuss and discuss. Shout out to Clint Sterner. Case number 2 against the Nick Caserio factor. There is a lot of loopholes that question Nick Caserio and how much blame he deserves for the coaches that he's hired. I just don't think those situations are proportional to how much more appealing this job is going to be, how much of a disaster things were when Nick Caserio inherited this situation, and where it needs to get. There needed to be a lot going on. Jack Easterby just left. The Jack Easterby factor is through the roof. And it's still a stench in the building. Caserio probably should have traded Brandon Cooks, but that's not what this one's about. That's not neither here nor there. Nick Caserio, if you want to criticize him for hiring David Culley, just tell me who he could have hired that was better. Furthermore, even if you had a good coach right now, and this is why I think Lovie's actually the good coach for now, even if you had a good coach now, it might be counterproductive. Lovie might just be perfect for right now because you can get that number 1 pick when you have this type of coach. From a roster perspective, what could Caserio have done? There's a few things we can point to. The Charles Omenihu thing, although that's an Easterby thing. You can just ask Charles. He liked my tweet about it. The Marcus Cannon and Shaq Lawson stuff, he's got an answer to that, but that's not monumental. I think Caserio had to clean up a mess. I think it's different. So I would be anxious to see who Nick Caserio would hire as head coach. But I don't think that Lovie deserves blame for where they are right now. I think that's more of a Cal McNair, Jack Easterby, Bill O'Brien thing. So I don't think like if anyone feels, if Lovie's got to go, Caserio's got to go. I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way, especially with the way he's drafted. I think he's drafted all right. I think there's a lot more young talent on his team than there was, but there is a Caserio factor that comes into when it comes for the case against. Do you trust him to hire a coach? Case against number 3, the perception. And this is the most common thing that you hear when you start talking about Lovie Smith potentially being one and done, is the perception. Can this organization handle a perception? Like, can they handle the perception of 2 one and dones? I just gave you the San Francisco example. And my thing with the perception is I think it should work 2 ways when we're talking about the perception. Because nobody in their right mind thought that Lovie Smith was a long-term hire when they hired him. Anyone who wants to pretend like if Lovie is one and done, that they thought he was long-term, first of all, I'd love to see the receipt. And second of all, I think you're being kind of dishonest with yourself. The other thing about perception is what exactly are you saying when you talk about the perception? You're talking about from a PR perspective, because you would be 100% correct about the Josh McCown thing. That would have been a disaster, and I don't think this organization would be able to withstand it. The Colts could withstand it in season with Jim Irsay, but I don't think the Texans could have, especially with Jack Easterby here. When you have Jack Easterby, the perception is already bad. So I actually think Jack Easterby being gone, the ball creep, I think that actually kind of minimizes the negative perception as well. And the other thing is, a lot of people that would have the perception about this, they're going to have the perception no matter what you do. Just Google Nick Sirianni and Eric Bieniemy and go back and look at what people were saying when Nick Sirianni was hired and talking about the Eric Bieniemy thing. Philadelphia hired a coach who has one of the best win percentages in the league. Indianapolis has unraveled since he left. He's done an excellent job. His team's really good, and they went through a process. They went through a very, very in-depth process. I think they hired. They interviewed 5 minority candidates, and they ended up with Nick Sirianni. And you still heard people criticizing it. I'm not saying there's not a problem. I'm just saying, like, if you're worried about perception, a lot of times that the stuff that you're worrying about, it's going to be criticized no matter what. I think the most important thing outside of a perception at this point, you got to get the right coach to coach the quarterback that you're likely going to pick with the number 1 pick. So I don't think perception should come into account. I think you should go through the right process. And it should be the fair process, and you should be open-minded to everything. But I don't think Nick Caserio should be worrying about perception. Nick Caserio needs to worry about getting the right coach here so that he can save his ass. Because if he doesn't hire the right coach, or if Lovie Smith is here and Lovie Smith doesn't coach up the team to the best of his ability, then his ass should be on the hot seat. That's the perception. I think Nick Caserio just wants to win. So I don't think the perception should matter too much. You go through the process, you figure it out. And man, if you can get a guy like a D'Amico Ryans who comes in here and does this thing, if it's, I don't know, pick another young coach that you like, whether it's Mike Kafka. I don't know. There's a lot of names out there. Go revisit the Jonathan Gannon thing. I'm sure Byron left. There's a lot of options, but I don't think perception should come into play. As long as your heart's in the right place, and as long as you're going through the right process, the perception shouldn't really come into. Now it should have last time. That was a disaster, but. I think you've cleaned up a little bit. Should Lovie be one and done? What do you think? At Landry Locker on Twitter, at Landry Locker on Instagram. Subscribe. Get in the comment. We will. I'll go through the comments real quick. Doesn't have to be real quick. Facebook user says absolutely. The team has regressed. Talking about Lovie Smith being one and done. I don't know that they've regressed. David Culley did win more games. I don't think it's as simple as one more games. And that's why I kind of rolled my eyes. And this is the other thing. Lovie Smith, when he was, and this is kind of where Lovie Smith has said some things that kind of back him into a corner, because Lovie, talking about being fired in Tampa Bay, he said, well, we won more games, from one year to the next. It's like, okay, but y'all weren't quite heading in the right direction. It was kind of a disaster. So I don't think you could just measure it by wins and losses. I actually think the team is a little bit more stable. I think the talent is better. I just think they've faced tougher competition, I guess, ish. So I don't think that Lovie is worse than David Culley or anything, although there are a lot of people that saying that. Matthew says, what kind of look does it cast on Caserio if he has 2 one-and-done coaches in a row? Niners made it work, but can Caserio? Fair question. Don't know. We haven't really seen Nick Caserio in a situation in which this job is appealing, make a hire. So I think that's fair. Touch of Trent. I hope he's one and done. Doesn't make sense for him not to be if they decide to take a QB. I think Ross Tucker said the exact same thing on that, and I think that's fair. Should have just kept Coley another year, to be honest. Maybe, maybe not. Matthew Graves says, hell no, if we don't draft Bryce Young, I'm afraid the regime will ruin him. Facts from Touch of Trent. Texas Misfit says, DeMeco Ryans next head coach, Bryce Young and Bijan Robinson would be great. Hey, the dream scenario for me would be DeMeco Ryans as head coach, Bryce Young, number 1 pick, number 2 pick, Carter from Georgia, or Will Anderson falls and the Browns plummet. And then first pick in the second round, Bijan Robinson, A-Chain, or Gibbs fall. So you have Pierce and Gibbs or A-Chain as running backs. Because y'all know I like running backs. It's an absolute disaster. From Facebook, Landry Locker, love you, bro. Love you too, Facebook user. Chris says DeMeco Ryans. That's obviously the popular pick. Jets TGTX says not with Pep. Yes, I can agree. Lot of people talking about one and dones. Mr. H says Easterby is gone, so it's a pretty good start. Can't disagree with that. Also says don't know about Sala. I like Sala, and I think DeMeco is cut from that same cloth. So I'm good with that. Still got the Bijan stuff going. Do you really think they're close? I don't think they're like Lovey. Like most NFL teams are close. Like most games are close. But I think with the right free agent class and right with a good draft class next year and a guy who can coach him up, I mean, we could see a team around 500, flirting with the wild card. I don't think it's too far-fetched to think. Someone's asking about Leslie Frazier. Good on that. Not really too down with that. Someone says trade a 5th-round pick to Miami to coach Mike McDaniel. Come on, Mike McDaniel ain't going nowhere. Says Landry, technically it's the same coaching staff since 2020. So what changes were made besides B.O.B., Coley, and Tim Kelly? Cornell is still with the team. Actually, Cornell retired. So that is not true, my friend. Yes, he's not earned a second year. Players can't tackle. Simple mistakes should have been corrected. Don't disagree. We have some Bieniemy questions. Look, 20 teams have interviewed Eric Bieniemy, and they haven't gone with him. I think you're kind of seeing like Kafka doing his thing in New York. I don't know the Bieniemy thing. I just know that a lot of teams have interviewed him, and yeah, don't know. Juan says something got to change. Give the fans some hope or something and look forward to. Does the stadium being empty the last 2 years hurt Cal's wallet? Not as much as you would think. And I think getting a quarterback at 1 would help, especially if it's someone like a Bryce Young. So we can figure that out. Black like Vader. Casario didn't pick Lovie. Lovie and Josh McCown thanks to Easterby. See, I heard that Lovie Smith was kind of an Easterby hire too. Because if you remember, he was in town and got the job very quickly. So I'd actually heard that too, but I'm not 100% certain. I also wonder, and this is the thing that maybe we haven't brought up. I also wonder if maybe, just maybe, that Lovie Smith is going to retire after this year anyways. That's another thing that I think we should take into account. Mechie coming back next year with Young and Gibbs would be interesting. Yes, it would. It would be absolutely awesome. If you ask me, trade a pick to the Rams for their coach. Come on. Damn well it ain't going to take no fit to get McVay here. So it'll be interesting. Cuss and discuss. It's going to be again, Lovie, right guy now. Is he the right guy next year? I have my doubts. You saw I laid it out. 5 reasons for, 3 reasons against. So we'll see. And of course, maybe Lovie doesn't even want to be back. Process over results right now. Biggest result right now, need to keep losing. And they got the right guy for the gig. At least I believe. Well, at least history kind of shows. Lovie Smith. Subscribe to the channel, spread the word, listen to In the Loop 10 to 2 Monday through Friday on Sports Radio 610. Appreciate y'all. Have a good one. Remember, though, no matter how bad it gets, we're all in this together. Have a good one.